I was imagining there being torches and pitchforks, but I was actually met with the complete opposite. People were so proud of me for having the courage to step forward.
You know, when I tell people what I do for a living, the looks I would get back. If anyone in the room were struggling, they would probably go further into their shell.
There's this fear of, am I just going to be lumped in as some kind of pedophile pervert? There's so much fear and anxiety around this.
With pornography, you are already starting behind. It's a hidden activity. It's a closed door activity. Where do I start? Do I know anybody else who struggles with this?
Hey everybody, Hunter Otis here. Welcome to the Porn-Free Revolution. We help men quit porn, rebuild trust, and become irresistible, reclaim the life that they've always wanted. Very excited to be here with you all that are listening today. We have a special guest. His name is George Embiricos. He's from New York. He is the owner and founder of Healthier Connections Therapy. You can find him healthierconnections.com. He is a licensed clinical social worker. He's also a certified partner trauma therapist. So a few things. He's been working in this field that we'll be discussing, addiction, compulsive behavior, for quite a few years. He's been trained by quite a few amazing CSATs. He's been around for some time now. He's worked with a lot of clients, but he's an expert in intimacy and relationship issues, betrayal and infidelity, and also addiction and compulsivity. So today, anyway, welcome, George. Stoked to have you here.
Quite the introduction. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add at all before we dive in?
I think you hit everything. I'll keep letting you stroke my ego.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you today because we're talking a lot today about the stigma that there is around a compulsive porn use or addiction, whichever you'd like to call it, and how that's just really limiting many, many, many men and women, and stopping them from getting the help that they need because of this stigma around it. It's hard to navigate around this and through this, right? So we're going to be talking a lot about that. We're also going to be talking about how our upbringings have impacted our use of pornography or other compulsive behaviors, and how our modern day and age is making it really freaking difficult to overcome this as well. So lots of good things we're going to talk about today. Thanks for joining us, George.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Hunter.
Yeah, let's dive in first to this whole stigma.
Oof.
Right. I mean,
where to start?
Right, where to start? I mean, I experienced this big time, right? I mean, it's a big part of a big driver behind the shame that I experienced in overcoming this myself. It's like, holy crap, what if I tell my wife this, what's she going to think about me? What's society going to think about me? What does it say about me? What does that actually mean that I use porn? Mm-hmm. The world over here is saying everyone does it, but then, maybe my Christian upbringing over here is like, you're a horrible, dirty sinner if you use it. You shouldn't even think anything impure, let alone go and do something impure. Like, there's just a lot there. So
a lot of messaging out there that
let's just dive in.
Organization and where to begin with this. I'll start with when I tell people what I do for a living. And, I used to just say therapist, and people would ask, well, what type of therapist? And then I'd say intimacy, or I've learned to say intimacy, but I used to say, sex and pornography addiction. And, just the looks I would get back or the responses I would get back would just contribute so much to that stigmatization. And if anyone in the room were struggling with any of the issues that we just discussed, they would probably go further into their shell because the responses I get back are either laughter, saying like, "Oh, come on, you don't really do that," or like, "Oh, wait, so how much is too much?" Just the bro-y questions, if you will.
Right.
And it just contributes to so much stigmatization. I mean, even just the way that people like just immediately the instinctual like, "Whoa, that's what you do?" Like, I wasn't bargaining for that. Like, let's talk about something else.
Yeah. Also, it's just like crickets, right? You're like, oh,
exactly. Or
that's
the opposite. Like, let's talk. Oh my God, you need to answer all my questions about pornography. And
right.
Like, it's, as you said, there's a lot out there about just messaging that's conflicting, and there's so much that contributes to stigmatization.
Yeah. So if someone is really struggling with this shame and fear around, what does this mean about me if I were to accept this or admit this or confront this? Like, what what the heck does somebody do to help to start overcoming that? What do you think?
I think that somebody's got to take a good look in the mirror with themselves, and we throw around the word addiction a lot, and I'm not a big. I know we talked briefly before about labeling, and I'm not a big fan of labeling. It doesn't need to don't need to be an addict, but a lot of addiction is addiction in terms of what are the telltale signs. The one overall that I would say is that you've lost control of your life, that you are not in control of your life. The subtitles to that would be, your work is suffering, your personal life is suffering, potentially your finances are suffering, you're spending more time doing something than you thought you would at the outset. So it becomes unbearable. And again, these are models that typically today we think about with drugs and alcohol are the first things that come to mind, but pornography, sex, gambling, even food, and I say even food, which I'm kind of stigmatizing more by saying even, but
Right.
food, like TikTok, there's so many things that can fit the bill of this, of this addiction, if you will, compulsive behavior that is kind of getting out of control and is affecting not only you, but everybody close to you in your life.
Yeah, I think it's so big because, kind of talking about the word addiction versus saying it's just a compulsive behavior or just a compulsive behavior or
Right.
what have you, right? The reality is at the end of the day, like it's just something that's having significant real world consequences in your life, right?
Correct.
I mean, the classic like definition of addiction, right, would be, okay, you've tried to quit many times and have failed to quit. You still do it even though there's perceived or real consequences.
Yep.
You're doing it more over time, and it's escalating to other types of behaviors, maybe not beyond pornography, but maybe different types of more extreme type material.
Sure.
Things like that. So you're doing it more often for longer duration. Need more of a thrill to get the same type of effect,
exactly.
Right? These are like the classic telltale signs of definition of addiction.
Right.
But something that I want to throw in there is, we sometimes when it comes to like trauma, we'll say that there's little T traumas and big T traumas. Like there's the big ones that happen to us that can be life shattering. And then there's the little ones that can add up over time. I like to say like little A addiction and big A addiction. Basically, they're the same. But for me, it's like mentally, if you see it as like a capital A addiction, meaning I'm stuck, I have a permanent brain disease, I'm never going to be able to get over this. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. Like that's just not helpful.
No. And right? I think in today's society already with pornography and sex, but let's stick with pornography just for the sake right now. I think you're already at a disadvantage because you're starting behind. Pornography is a hidden activity. It's a closed door activity as is. Whereas, drinking, for example, other people are doing it out in the open. So with pornography, you are already starting behind, if that makes sense. It's something that most people do, and that can almost be a defense. It's legal. You're already starting behind in terms of where do I start? How many do I know anybody else who struggles with this? And it's something that's much more kept to people. And one other thing I'll say is like in terms of just the publicity out there is the recovery months dedicated entirely to recovery, to celebrities coming out and saying they've had issues with drugs, with alcohol. Everyone's applauded. I think in 2025,
they're celebrated.
It's helped. We've come a long way with mental health, but just with certain parts of it, it's like certain parts have been left behind, and so we're still just unveiling just a little bit of what's going on in a very much hidden world. And so while celebrities and whatnot and you and I can probably go back and forth and name celebrities who have overcome their addictions and are now clean and sober, not drinking and whatnot. With sex addiction and pornography addiction, that still remains hidden. And the number one example I'll use is I'll always ask, friends, do you know any sex addicts? They'll say, oh yeah, Tiger Woods. And anyone else?
It's always like wrapped up in some like huge scandal, right? Like
exactly.
yeah.
And oh my, how crazy that was that he had sex addiction. That's just, yeah.
Well, and another thing too, that this is something that I experienced, we were chatting about briefly, but here I was struggling with pornography, and don't get me wrong, I don't like to say just pornography, because I mean, the infidelity that was legitimately happening in my relationship was big. I mean, I was keeping it a secret. I was hiding it from my wife. She had boundaries. Just, hey, I want you to communicate with me if you struggle with this, before being intimate with me or anything like that. Like, legitimate requests, and those requests and boundaries are being broken.
Absolutely.
That is an infidelity, and it's and the shame that I felt, and it was a lot driven by like lack of self-worth and guilt and shame. And so this is like a serious issue. But something that I experienced was, then I went to 12-step. And I'm not anti 12-step by any stretch of the imagination. But for me, I had this experience where I went in and would sit down, and don't get me wrong, there were really great men there. But then I'm sitting down and sharing about how I'm struggling with pornography. And then the man next to me is telling stories and how he molested his 3 granddaughters. Right. And so there's this fear of, am I just going to be lumped in as some kind of pedophile, pervert? Like, there's so much fear and anxiety around this. If I come out and say that I view porn, like, people are going to think that I do this, and this, and this. And how does somebody overcome that and come to grips with that?
Sex offender, right?
Yeah, sex offender.
All these sudden words that because we don't know a lot about these things aren't out in the open. So it's a lot like, if this were to come out, how will people view me? Will they view me as a sex offender? Will they view me as a pedophile? Words that you used. But it's a really good point I think you made about infidelity. And I think we have these preconceived notions of what infidelity is, what an affair is. For example, people will use an emotional affair. It's almost like we want to define these things so much and make justifications, rationalizations for why we're not doing them when we're watching only porn, quote unquote. But you and I just discussed, a lot of the barometers of what compulsive. Let's keep the addiction out of it. What can these compulsive behaviors do? And if your pornography usage is attributing to all of these things, then absolutely you're being unfaithful. You're suffering from infidelity, betrayal, whatever word clicks the most for you. I don't want to put you in a box, but and we mentioned a lot of them. One of the things main to pornography also is it's kind of a desensitization of fantasy and real world. So pornography is going to be fantasy, right? You are watching paid actors, actresses, the highest end of their field, with unnatural bodies, doing things. And if you start watching this in teenage years, for example, you come to expect this, and you're not going to get aroused in the real world, with your partner, with your spouse, with your wife, whatnot. So that's the most that's the most tangible thing that people see most often. And it's this.
Well, and sex and porn use are like so completely different, right? With actual sexual intimacy with a partner, there's vulnerability, there's touch, there's sounds, there's smells, there's exposure.
Use another word there, intimacy, which a lot of people who I've worked with will equate with sex. Immediately, I'll say, how many times how intimate were you with your wife this week? And they'll say, we had sex twice.
Right.
Well, okay, but
it's because you could have sex and there's zero intimacy.
Right? Yeah. Just fulfilling an urge that otherwise would have been taken up by porn. But what porn does is it kind of sucks out it over time, just like any addiction or compulsive behavior, it sucks out the ability to be intimate, and also creates a sense of false intimacy between you and the pornography. In a lot of ways it connects, and we'll get into, I'm sure, growing up and, how one becomes a compulsive porn user, for example, what some patterns are, but creates this sense of false intimacy of I am accepted here in this community, in this fantasy community. And then once you step out, you're further away ever from actual reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we kind of covered a couple of things here, right? Like the different stigmatizations that can come up with this, but then we also naturally just ended up alluding to like the problematic nature of pornography, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably a big part of this is accepting the reality that pornography is just simply problematic for you. Right? It's causing real world consequences and issues. And at the end of the day, some people are going to think what people are going to think. Mm-hmm. But what I've discovered for myself, and if this gives any ounce of encouragement to people, is when I came forward, I remember for the first time and was publicly open. That's not what I suggest for everybody, by the way, about my own struggle. I was imagining there being torches and pitchforks and, all of this stuff. But I was actually met with the complete opposite. People were so proud of me for having the courage to step forward and bring the conversation out in the open. And the amount of positive interactions that created was unimaginable.
And that's great to hear.
It blew my mind.
That's fantastic.
The reality is that the world is starving for this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think as men, like we are also starving to step into our full potential.
Absolutely.
At least those that want to change, right?
You mentioned some 12-step meetings earlier, and whether take them, leave them. I have clients who are very involved, clients who do not resonate with them. But I think case in point to what you were saying about coming forward and being met with so much is that I would say most of the world doesn't, myself included, before I started this work, didn't know that 12-step programs existed for pretty much everything. And there's an old adage in which, there's an AA house on the block that's like the party house, and the NA house down the block that's a little, shabbier. And then way behind 8 turns and some lost directions, it's this tiny little rundown, SAA or SLAA or SA meeting in which it's hushed voices and whatnot.
Yeah,
that just plays.
We deal with sex addiction over here.
Sex addiction, and stay away from the mainstream and whatnot. So I'm really glad to hear that you were met with that. And as I mentioned with you briefly, there's essentially, I'll boil down to 2 ways that people come forward, and one is on their own, recognizing that there is an issue and problems that their compulsive behaviors, be it with pornography or otherwise, have caused, and the other is being caught and discovery. And the latter always results in the person kind of being there in therapy, or I'm a therapist, so I'll just talk from a therapist point of view, being there in therapy and needing kind of the first large portion of therapy being for them to convince themselves that they're there for themselves, and not to appease the spouse who is upset because he or she, I'll say he or she, even though we're programmed to say she, came across a hidden world, an internet history, a conversation with the fantasy type person. There's just this. Discovery is also a very big part of it, and it feeds into the hidden world kind of closed door mentality of pornography in general.
Right, and the fact that your partner may have a really, really strong negative reaction to that discovery.
Absolutely,
it's terrifying, and then they're questioning, who are you? Do I even know you? Can I trust anything you say? Can I trust anyone in the entire world now? Because the person closest to me, is able to lie straight to my face with a straight face. And so there's all these messages that we're receiving that make this just absolutely and completely terrifying. And the maybe to kind of wrap up this segment of this is just, if this is you and you're listening to this, I just want to give you encouragement. You don't have a permanent brain disease, meaning you're not going to have to be stuck with the acting out behavior forever. There is healing. It's absolutely possible. I'm a living witness of that. I have hundreds of men that are living witnesses of that. You can change. Your identity can change. The things that people may think or perceive about you initially do not have to be true about you. And chances are you're probably blowing it up even more in your head. Don't get me wrong. There may be, not will be, but there may be people that do think those things. But at the end of the day, your commitment to the life that you desire to live far outweighs anything anyone could ever possibly think about you. And any potential consequences that may arise by you coming forward and grabbing hold of ownership and accountability for your life. And that's really what it comes down to. The stigma, it's there. And yes, it's something an obstacle that can be in the way a bit or make it difficult to come forward. But at the end of the day, grab hold of what you want in your life. And if this is really hindering you in your progression, your development, your intimacy in your relationship, and you want something more, grab hold of that desire and go all in with it. And getting help can help you just navigate through the stress and strain that these stigmas can bring.
But with that said, don't want to minimize it either. I mean, it's a really big struggle to come forward. You mentioned things like, how's my spouse going to react and whatnot. And there is this almost unique thing with pornography in which your spouse may have zero idea. Definitely know that something's up, that that you haven't been present, for example. But again,
right.
with drinking, with other things, there's some more telltale signs. Whereas this can be kind of kept, again, behind closed doors. So there is that need for people to take that step forward on their own and take that accountability. And the more we shine a light on it and the more we normalize it, the more men who are going to come forward. I say men, but men, women, anyone come forward and really, seek to heal.
Yeah, and if you're stuck in isolation and you feel like super alone, like no one else is struggling with this but me, just know that we're actually like the least alone part of the population, like on the face of the planet right now. It's like estimated over 90% of men are at least viewing porn on a monthly basis. That doesn't mean 90% of men have a problematic issue. Let's be clear about that. But that's how many men are using it monthly, but estimated over 60% of women as well. Mm-hmm. So this is huge, right? This is a huge number.
Yeah, and that's the double standard,
Yes.
And we can dip into betrayed partners here for a second. When I was at my previous job, I have a CPTT, a certified partner trauma therapist certificate, and I was very excited to put it to use and help betrayed partners who are males in their relationships. And in 2 years that I had that degree, I still have it, but in the 2 final years of that company, 2 men came forward versus, we had our most popular group with wait lists, 3 of them full with 10 people were the betrayed partner female groups, which would also get together in the city and have dinner, and really build a community. So there really is this double standard in terms of pornography usage, masturbation, betrayed partners, cheating, infidelity, really, really, really these stereotypes that play in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think men we're terrified of being like the predator, right? We're absolutely terrified of hurting women. Mm-hmm. Or people thinking that we're hurting women.
Right.
And, one final thing I'll say, and this is not to drive the shame for anyone, but the reality is too, with the pornography, I know we're talking stigma, we're kind of getting the other side of like what's actually problematic about it, damaging to your relationships, your personal life, your self-worth, etc. But kind of the dark side of pornography is that, I don't know if this number is accurate, but it's, again, an estimated like 30% of pornography is of trafficked or unconsenting individuals. Mm-hmm. And that is a hard part of this to face. And this could be feeding into why there is also stigma attached is,
Sure.
there's a whole supply and demand thing included in this, right? And it's hard to confront that we've been part of that wheel.
Right.
And that's hard. It requires support. It requires learning skills to be able to hold yourself in warm regard, and build up that self-esteem and self-worth, even though we've struggled with some of these things.
Sure.
But let's talk then about how can knowing how we got here help to reduce the shame and lift some of these things so that we can move forward and get help.
Sure. And the first thing I'd want to do is normalize shame and guilt. I mean, these are, if people listening are feeling full of shame and guilt, these are very normal emotions to feel in any addiction cycle, which goes around, from anticipation, which ends up becoming kind of the biggest thing, to the acting out behavior itself, the kind of ritual, right, leads up to the acting out behavior, which ends up being the shortest actual time in the circle, and then the shame and guilt that kicks in. So, if you're riddled with shame, guilt, trying to help propel and put that forward, and get some help is really the best thing that you can do. And the way I approach it, I'll approach it when I have a new client, is from kind of a two-pronged model. And that'll be one, kind of Band-Aid measures. Like, what can we do between this week and next week to mark some tangible progress? And that's where it doesn't matter if you view pornography every day, all day, if you're masturbating 15 times a day, if you're watching once a day, but you're doing it because, and that, your wife would extremely disapprove of it. So you're, locking doors and whatnot, whatever it is, however it is that it is problematic. What can we do between now and next week so that we start marking some progress? And then while we're adding these Band-Aid measures, we're also going to do the deeper work, which is the roots, the causes. How did we get here? How did we get to you? And this problematic behavior coming to light.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important, just being able to dig in, and because, a lot of what we've experienced in life is what's contributing to this. So, like, for example, compulsive behaviors, addictions, even eating disorders, all kinds of these issues are largely rooted in trauma and childhood trauma, right? Not necessarily. There's adult trauma as well that happens that can trigger some of these things. But for most people, these issues started early and chased us into adulthood, right? And so looking at that, the reality is you were a child,
right?
And you were a developing child in a couple stages of development. There's a lot of different opinions on this, but it's like that age 0 to 8 years old is just all about survival, right? Like, you're completely dependent. After that,
you don't have many memories, right? You're being told memories of
right. You don't really have as many memories.
Right.
You also, how conscious are you?
Right.
Like, you're
how
just
much control are you? Huh.
Yeah, like you're a child, and your environment means everything.
Yeah,
it means everything, and you're mapping how to operate in the world, and who you can trust, and who's safe and who's not safe. And a big problem with that is children, like, for example, when they see parents fighting, when there's verbal abuse or sexual abuse, kids internalize it. They take it personal, like, this was my fault, when it wasn't. You were a child. But that's how kids internalize it. And then that goes into the next thing. And then those adolescent years, it's like, we're trying to belong. We're trying to find safety socially, right? In society. And so we're towing the line, like
normalcy.
Yeah, like maybe we're raised in a certain religion. This is not a dog on religion, because I'm very active in my faith, right? But we want to toe the line. We want to follow the rules. We don't really think for ourselves. We're just kind of just doing what we're told because we want to belong. We need to belong, right? For safety's sake. But when there's trauma and these years of development are hindered or greatly disrupted because of a huge breach in trust through abuse, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, neglect, what have you, or just seeing negative patterns at home. How much of this is really truly your fault?
Sure.
I mean, probably a very small amount of it.
Yeah.
Right. The hard thing is then as adults, it's like no one else is going to come and fix it for us. Now we're left with the aftermath, and it's our responsibility
Correct.
to address it.
Yeah.
But what I've seen, and maybe you can second this or add your thoughts to this, is just that when I can look back and understand kind of how I got here and understand and look and map out the different experiences that I had, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. Like I was using porn to survive.
Right. And
emotionally.
So I want to say a few things there, which is that, trauma is a big word. Trauma, whether it's a big T, little t, whatever it is. But, people think of trauma and they think of verbal abuse, sexual abuse, what have you. Trauma can be a tiny little thing, emotional abuse, such as, you fall over at age 4, age 5, age 6, you skin your knee and your parent picks you up and says, no crying here. We don't do that here. You're fine. And that's just subliminal messaging right there that, we're not going to talk about this. You're okay. Take that to the bedroom. That's where that goes. So just want to point out that, we as a society do not need to go through a big traumatic event in the way that people might think of trauma in order to suffer from an illness, a compulsive behavior as a result, as a coping mechanism. So
like I had a client. Here's a quick example. Like I had a client just this last week say, when I was a kid, my father, he never gave me really any praise, but when I did something wrong, man, he looked at me with just that look of criticism.
Right. So where are you going to look for that praise, right? If he's not giving it to you, you'll look to, you'll look somewhere else. And, maybe you look to the internet and you look to a fantasy world of things. But
you're begging for like a sense of validation, encouragement, and acceptance, especially from a father figure, acceptance. And then nurturing from the mother. And if that's not there, if your mother's giving you kind of that cold shoulder. So maybe, again, it's not like this huge trauma, but these little things, that these messages you receive over time that stack and add up.
Absolutely. And if we want to, kind of compartmentalize again, the big qualities that I see in clients, almost everyone, is that, lack of people to talk to about feelings, either a lack of people, or it's not there, you don't want to, because of all these messages, subliminal messages that have been passed along. So you get to a point where maybe it's adolescence, early adolescence, where you want to you want to feel good, you want to be heard, you want to be seen, and so you turn to something like pornography, drinking, drugs, eating disorder, anything that starts out, that I have to point out, adaptive. It starts out filling that role of whatever you're looking at to fill, filling that void. You get home, and let's say in the 2 hours that you'd be alone, or in the hour and a half that you might be yelled at by somebody in the home for not doing what you're supposed to do, you are watching pornography, and it's filling that void. It's avoiding the realities of what's going on at home, but at the same time, you're also going off and building into a world that is going to cause more problems down the line. And adaptive becomes maladaptive, and once that happens, you're off to the races.
Yeah, and I think if this happens in your formative years, like your brain becomes conditioned for this type of hyperstimulus.
Yes.
Right. We see the hyperstimulus in other areas, for example, like highly processed, sugary, chemical laden foods, right? They're hyperstimulating. So in fact, they even put artificial sweeteners and ingredients in foods, especially here in America, that don't even necessarily taste the best, but it creates the chemical response in the brain.
Right.
So it might not even taste that great, but man, it lights up the brain, right? So that's, and pornography is the same way, right? Like it's hyper stimulating. It's
Lights
not
up
just
those
seeing,
synapses. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not even just seeing, naked imagery of people or anything. This is, edited, perfect lighting, like close up, HD,
It's
like
not real.
it's
First,
not
it's
real.
not
Like
real.
it's more high
It's like
definition
the
than you
food,
can even
right?
see
The
in real
food
life.
sweetener, that's not real. I mean, it's put together. It's
Yeah.
manufactured in order to elicit that reaction.
Right. And so when you've been raised on this,
Right.
and now you have emotional pain, and then you view pornography, masturbation, etc., as involved, holy cow, all of a sudden you just got some medication for the soul, right? It's temporary. You don't know that it's not good for you, but all you know is you've got relief.
Sure.
And
And
all
also
that sends to the brain, like, do more of this.
yes. And so to the other point of that, yes, do more of this, do more of this. And then let's say, you had your first exposure to pornography at 10 years old, 11 years old. And that age keeps getting younger, by the way. And just to quickly go into first exposures, I'm in my mid 30s. We're known as the internet generation. We had our AOL 2.0 dialing up, whatnot. But like Kazaa, right? LimeWire, Napster,
LimeWire.
But older generation might stumble across a father's collection of pornography tapes. Generation above that might stumble across Playboy magazine. Gosh help us now with the amount of resources and apps and things that are out there. And I'm sure we'll get into accessibility in a few minutes, but I did want to say, in terms of, I do want to stay out of medical things because I'm not an MD, but in terms of building that tolerance to it and that dependence on it, I'll often ask clients, how long have you been with your spouse? And they'll say, well, we've been together 12 years. And I'll say, well, how long have you had a relationship with pornography? And it'll be 30. And I'll be like, well, you think she stands a chance? That's by far your longest relationship. Is you're one with pornography. You started at age 10, now you're 40, let's say, and you've had a 30-year relationship. So that's not going to be easy. It's understatement of the century. That's not going to be easy to break. That's not going to be easy to work on.
Yeah, and maybe that's a really important distinction too. For if someone who's experienced betrayal is watching this, it's truly, I know it's so hard to even understand this, how this could even be possible, but it's truly not about you or because of you. Pornography, it's so completely different. And oftentimes what I hear my men say all the time is like, I am super attracted to my wife. Mm-hmm. That's not always the case, right? But most of them are like, I am so attracted to my wife. I love her. She's an incredible woman. She doesn't deserve this. Now she really thinks that I'm not attracted to her, that I'd prefer this over here. But it's, it's that difference between intimacy and just like a coping mechanism over here. This is used for coping, and it's been there a long time before you were part of the picture.
Right.
And that's why it continues, even though that there's real world consequences to acting out and it damages the relationship with a betrayed partner. This is my survival tool.
Right.
I can't live without this. This isn't true, but this is what the brain thinks.
And that could be interchangeable with any amount of addictions, compulsive behaviors. But
absolutely,
there is a sense of pornography with the spouse that's going to bring forth more intimate questions, just because of the nature of pornography and what it causes and in the bedroom and doesn't cause in the bedroom. The idea of you have chosen this over me, which is a common refrain in addiction. You've chosen this substance over me, et cetera, et cetera. But with pornography, it's even more personal and that much more then stigmatized and difficult to come forward when that there's going to be so many questions, let's say, from your spouse, from your partner, and you're going to want to try and take care of it on your own. And again, that what are your odds when you've had a 30-year relationship of just taking care on your own, in non-waking hours? It's just it's impossible.
Right. Yeah, and this isn't to condone anyone's behavior, right? Like it doesn't justify someone acting out, and it's not like, oh, well, it shouldn't be so impactful on the spouse. That's absolutely
Right.
not what we're
No,
saying, right? Like, it makes sense why it's so devastating.
absolutely.
But with that in mind, like, if you haven't been able to overcome this on your own over all of these years, it's okay to get help.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, you were a child and you had no idea what was going on then, and these patterns were put in place for many, many years. And it's okay that you don't know how right now to cope with your reality without it yet.
Right.
Maybe you're an adult now, but you probably haven't been taught the skills yet to do that.
Sure.
And that's okay.
Sure.
And that may not be your fault, but again, it is now just your responsibility as an adult to grab hold of an opportunity to get more support.
Sure. And we mentioned
ahead.
accessibility quickly, but I think that's
Yeah, go for it.
definitely a big thing to bring up. That's, again, somewhat unique to pornography. I'd throw in gambling as well. If the example I like to use is, if you're a recovering alcoholic, or if you're, someone who's trying to not drink, let's just put it that way, trying not to not drink, you don't go to bed with half a bottle of whiskey under your bed if you're really trying, or, you've cleaned out the house of bottles of alcohol. Same thing with drugs, same thing with, a lot of different vices, and you've made it that much harder for yourself to get access to it. You have to, here we're in New York City, so maybe you have to walk 8 blocks to the nearest liquor store instead of anywhere except for New York City, where you probably have to get in a car and drive 15 minutes to the liquor store. And maybe you started to do the work. Maybe you started to put in place a support system, people you can call, people who you can rely on. You have a relatively long period of time between the urge to do something and actually doing it. Going to the liquor store, picking it up, buying it, driving it home, starting to drink it, let's say. There's a lot there, that a lot of time, first of all, that elapses, that you can, surf and wave surf and whatnot, and that's more skills based. And there's a lot of time you can reach out for help. Now with pornography, it's accessible on any phone, and sure, some of the early Band-Aid work can be, putting on restrictions on apps and things like that, so you can't see the things. But there's always going to be phones. There's always going to be screens in the home. So when you go to bed, you're always your time from urge to action is just so short, and you're not given a chance really to. Same with gambling. You can gamble away your life savings in 2 clicks. Open app, deposit, click on a bet.
Yep.
Three clicks. So it's, with pornography, it does present that especially unique challenge, and that's all the more reason that it's important for you to ask for help, and ask others for help, and get together a support system.
Yeah, because with this thing, it's like you've got a heroin needle strapped to your wrist at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have accountability software and what have you in place, in fact, for me, that wasn't even helpful, because then I just saw it like a game, and I got dopamine from finding the loopholes.
Exactly. If you're good enough to put it in, you're good enough to take it out. And people who are good at having compulsive behaviors know, when there's a will, there's a way. And as you said, that becomes the game. Getting around it, and finding the computer in the work office that you're able to do it, or finding the one site that slips through the cracks or whatnot. So good Band-Aid measure, for example, but again, you're kind of you have to do the deeper work of, how did I get here?
Yeah, and maybe that's what we could wrap up with is, we've walked down the path of, okay, all the stigmatization around it, the real world consequences that we're legitimately experiencing personally in our relationships, et cetera. We've gone down, some of the things that could contribute to why we struggle with this. But now that we kind of understand the why, and are hopefully kind of working through combating some of that shame, what do we do now? Like, what's and obviously I've got ideas here, but I want to see what your thoughts are. Like, how does someone get started unraveling this mess?
Mm-hmm. Someone gets started unraveling this mess by, first of all, by doing something that is terrifying, being truthful, being honest. That's the number one thing you can do for yourself, for your spouse, holding yourself accountable. As you said, this did not start out as your fault. This is not your fault, but over the years, however long it's been, it gets harder and harder and harder to come forward. You can definitely start by being the first person to make a move, not waiting for discovery. Coming forward and saying, I have a problem, I have an issue. And, my job, your job is to destigmatize this issue so that becomes easier for people to do. Once, they're in work, and for me, that would be therapy, for example. It's unraveling. How did you get here? Why was this your drug of choice, if you will? With pornography, there's that, we touched upon it, that really strong element of isolation. With drinking, with drugs, like over time, it tends to isolate you. Pornography, you're isolated in the beginning. So, it really feeds into that. But to your question of, what people can do, they can really throw themselves into, I want to get help. And I want to do everything possible I can. And now let me look into resources. And I think they'll be pleasantly surprised to see what is out there. And what a little bit of investigation can bring, and hopefully how little stigmatization they are met with when they bring this up.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it is a huge relief to get into an environment where you're encouraged, supported, valued, loved, and where there isn't that weight of toxic shame. It can really help lift you in the midst of such difficult times, especially if you're in a relationship that's kind of coming apart at the seams right now. So I second that completely. And I will say too, from my perspective, what I've seen as well, there's kind of like two sides to this coin. Well, there's multiple sides. So we've hit like get help, right? Get help. But in that help, what I like to say is that, one side of the coin, we have just your conditioning in your brain that we have to confront. And that requires skills and tools and accountability, right? And honesty and getting back up when you make mistakes and and fail, right? And fall short. So we have to confront the conditioning. We need to do the work that's going to rewire your brain. And that is a skill set that doesn't just happen by accident, right? It didn't get here. Yeah.
It's a lot of time.
Get here by accident. It's not going to unravel.
30 years, let's say, right? In your early example, to wire. So it's going to take, I'm not going to say 30 years to unravel, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah. It's going to take time.
It's going to take time.
And then the other side of that is, I say too, our behaviors will always realign with what we believe to be true about ourselves over time. So if you believe you're a worthless sack of garbage, a shameful wretch that can never do anything right, that you're worthless, not good enough. I mean, all these negative cognitions are running rampant in your mind and in your heart. Your behaviors are going to realign with that. You're going to throw in the towel over time. So willpower is only going to get you so far. We have to help you have an identity shift and to believe that you're worth more.
I think that's a great point, Hunter. And in all my work with pornography, those terms, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, always come up. Because and intimacy, we think about intimacy, and I kind of alluded earlier, we think intimacy, how many times did I have sex? But it's intimacy, self-intimacy also, loving yourself. Yes. You have to love yourself before you're able even to have a chance of loving someone else or taking care of someone else. So
yeah,
a lot of these, principles of recovery that you touched upon, I want to, again, second say that, a lot of the work is going to be, and this is why it's so important to come forward on your own and not necessarily with discovery, because, the work first needs to be done on yourself. And, whether you're alone or whether you're with someone or whatnot, it is going to be done. You're going to learn to love yourself. You're going to learn, all the ways in which, all the reasons why you've turned to something like pornography. And then there's going to be a void, right? Because let's be honest, pornography is taking up so much of your time, of your existence, of your money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And replacement activities, now we're kind of going down, what things help, but it's not going to be a 1-for-1. It's not going to be a go to the gym for 3 hours instead of, watching pornography for 3 hours. And it's going to be also a reminder that, whatever your formula is, let's say for starting out a life, a porn-free life, that takes up time, it's not going to feel the same. It's not going to feel the same thrill. And kind of coming to those understandings and conclusions that, slowly but surely, we are going to build a life without porn, but it's going to take time, and it's going to cause a lot of it. It's going to work a lot on self-identity and some topics which people are not necessarily comfortable talking about. And we're going to have to push and prod and really bring that out.
Yeah. Amen.
Gently and slowly, comfortably.
Yep.
And that in the therapeutic space, that is the number one thing that I want to do, is to create a safe, judgment-free space. And I think judgment-free for pornography specifically is vital.
Yes.
And creating that space and assuring people that there's normalcy to this.
Yeah. And my final question, and maybe even is just to the listener here, for you that are watching this, is why do you want to quit porn? Ask yourself that question, because that matters far more than any of the stigma, than any of the past mistakes or past traumas, than the current situation that you're in with your partner, maybe, and the difficulty there, and how upset they are with you. Like, what you want matters more than all of it. What you truly want, that higher version of you. And the power of getting help is someone like George, someone like myself, like we can help you anchor yourself to that why. So that when you are struggling with urges and a big part of you just wants to go back to your old ways, that you can have a guide like George here to help you continue to anchor yourself to your why, to continue to recommit.
A formula, a whole something. But
right, people,
as you said, Hunter, the first question is, why do you want to live a porn-free life? Not why do you, for your spouse, want to live a porn-free life?
Yeah.
It has to be from within.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. George, this has been awesome. It's really great to get to know you more, and I hope that this has been helpful for anyone listening. And I guess, George, if anyone is wanting to work with you, how can they find you?
You can find me on Healthier Connection. You can type in my name on Psychology Today, or George Embiricos, Embiricos. I do a lot of mostly individual one-on-one work. I do group work. I do some couples work as well, but mostly individual work. Or go to healthierconnections.com. I'm the owner and founder of Healthier Connections Therapy, which is my own private practice. And there's nothing more rewarding for me than helping individuals and seeing them, not me helping them, but seeing them help themselves. Helping them hold up a mirror to themselves and say, where can I help myself? And then watching them be motivated to take the next steps and finding what their own formulas are. There's nothing more rewarding, and I'm sure, Hunter, you can attest to this as someone who helps people. There's nothing more helpful than watching people help themselves. Oh yeah, it's incredible. Like, I just had a guy that started working with years ago, and there's pornography, there was prostitution, and you can imagine the betrayal from that discovery. And now they're still happily married. They've added 2 little ones to their marriage.
like their life is totally transformed. Like this can be you. If you're listening to this. Yeah, it can absolutely be you. George and I have both seen it. Like this is totally possible. This is totally doable. So just don't go it alone. Healthierconnections.com. You're licensed in New York, right, George?
Yes.
Yeah.
Licensed in New York. Telehealth in person. Yeah. And yeah, it won't be just me. You'll start with just me, and we'll build a bond, and I will help you. I know that I can help you find a way to a happier, porn-free life, and that it's all worth it for everything that goes in. And if you're sitting out there and if this resonates at all with you, I really, really highly encourage you to, if not me, someone start somewhere with something, with someone, confiding in a friend, anything just to get out of that hidden locked door.
Yeah, amen. And we've got just over 500 men at the time of this recording here in the Porn Free Brotherhood. I'll put a link below for all of this, by the way, for George's website, also the Porn Free Brotherhood. Just check that out below. It's free. Doesn't cost you anything. You can get in an environment of men that are all on that same path and start to help you lift this weight off of your shoulders. But yeah, we'd love to have you. Well, George, thanks, man. This has been sweet.
Thanks, Hunter. I really enjoyed coming on and talking. And hey, if there's one person who benefits from this, it's absolutely worth it. So I really hope that people listen and that people have questions. And thanks so much for having me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And thank you to those of you that have stayed with us this whole time. We appreciate you, and just know you're not alone. All right, George, we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Hunter. Thank you very much.
Yep, bye.